Chodesh Tov, that's true. Can you hear me though? Is this working okay? Can everybody hear me? Okay, so let's settle down. Does everybody have the source sheet? Yes, source sheets are outside, so if you don't have one, please grab one. And let us start. Okay. Let's take a minute to gather ourselves, to sit down, find our places. Okay. So first of all, I want to say Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Tov, ladies and gentlemen. It's Rosh Chodesh. And we're excited to start a new Chodesh. I don't know about you. I feel a little bit, I mean, I know it's not perfect and there's a lot of unknowns and we still have 13, fallen hostages we're waiting for. But I do feel like in some odd way, we're starting Acharei Chagim of 2023. So welcome to that new reality. I want to add something else. Two thoughts before we delve into the topic of this year's study and then into today's sources, etc. And for that, I do need my phone, which is a good opportunity to remind everybody to turn off their phones or to silence them. I wanted to say two things because we got so used to hold the gam v'gam, the this and that, the two sides, the two feelings, the two experiences at the same time. So I want to share with you the gam I carry with me today into our class. So first, I guess I should say, my name is Sharansky Danziger. I'm honored to be a teacher here at Matan. My passion is, I sound so millennial. My passion is Tanakh. But Tanakh as, a living text, as something that we live all the time. So I want to start with real life and then go into Tanakh. And the two things I wanted to share with you are these. For the past 2 years, we opened the year together, knowing there are members, of our society, of our people, or people who came to help us and live with us here, who are held in Gaza, and we don't know if they're being tortured or not, and in what conditions they're held. And this has been a weight that I didn't feel like I was prepared for. And even though there's still a lot of unknowns, and like I said, 13 bodies, so 13 fallen hostages we're still fighting for, the fact that there is no live hostage, no live person for the Gazans, the Hamas to torture right now, is a huge chesed. And I want to acknowledge that we're starting this year in a different place. That said, we carry with us also our pain. We carry with us the people we lost, the prices we paid. Not all prices are death. Some, I know people here whose loved ones were wounded or hurt in other ways, people who were displaced, people whose certainties were shaken and whose sense of security was compromised. We all pay. And I want to remember a specific person today. It's not a dedication. I will read the dedication in a minute. It's just someone whose family I know and love. Rav Seren Amitai Tzvi Granot, who was killed in the early days of the war on the border of Lebanon. He was fighting off Hezbollah terrorists trying to threaten Moshav Shtula in the north, and he was kind of halfway out of his armored vehicle or tank. I'm not good enough in army terms to understand, but he was like halfway through to kind of shoot and direct his team when RPG, I think, again, I'm not good at this, Numtet, hit the vehicle and he was killed. His grandparents are beloved members of my community, of my shul. His father is the famous Rav Tamir Granot. And I wanted to read to you, and I'll just do a simultaneous translation, something that Amitai Tzvi wrote for himself in his journal, and his family put out in a book that they published after his death. לאדם יש סימן בחיים שלו אם הוא מבקש משהו אמיתי, אם המניעים שלו טהורים. A person has a sign to tell him in his life if what he's looking for, what he's striving for is good and real, and if his motivation is pure. אם יש קשיים בדרך והוא נתקע ונופל, if there's difficulties in the way and he gets stuck or falls down, אם יש כעס או תסכול, אז משהו פה לא חלק, או במבוקש או במבקש. If what you experience is primarily anger or frustration, then something is not quite smooth, in his words, either in what you're looking for or in yourself, either in the mevukash, the thing you're striving for, or in yourself. I'm not going to read the whole text, but he goes on to explain that if what you're looking for is the right thing, then yes, you might feel frustration and anger. We all do, we're humans. But when you're running into difficulties, you're also going to feel what he calls ga'gua, yearning to be that version of yourself that can achieve that, yearning to be more than you are right now. And he says, when you're in a time of crisis, כשיש קושי, when there's difficulty, ואתה מגייס את כוח הרצון שלך כדי לגבור עליו, and you kind of galvanize your power of will to overcome it, זה ביטוי של בריאות, של בקשה אמיתית. This is an expression of health, inner health, and of true striving. But to overcome, what he implies here, and he doesn't say it directly, but what he implies here is that the thing that kind of helps us distinguish between a good striving and perhaps a striving where like we need to reconsider the terms of what it is we're striving for or how we're striving for it, etc., is that you run into the difficulty, but you yearn to be the kind of person who can overcome it and reach it, because that's the better, bigger, larger version of who you can be, of the person you're supposed to be in this world. And that yearning is so much stronger than the natural responses of fear, anger, frustration, disappointment, that you will overcome. But if what you feel is primarily anger and frustration and disappointment, and you don't feel that yearning, then maybe you need to reconsider where you're going, if that is the thing that's worth striving for. And I wanted to just to put it out there. I'm not going to try and connect it to what we're learning today. This is not about that. This is just about really bringing Amitai Tzvi with us into this class, and positing or praying that we will, at times of difficulty, and I think this is a difficult time, even with all the good things happening, this is a very difficult time, have the maturity, have the wisdom to sort through our feelings, to see what bigger versions of ourselves we're yearning to be, and aim our striving with God's help in that direction. May Amitai Tzvi's soul have an aliyah, and may the memory of Greta Abloh on the occasion of her 8th yortzeit have an aliyah, and thank you to the Abloh, and forgive me if I'm saying the name wrong, Tekuzner, thank you families for their sponsorship of this class. We appreciate it. And now let us go into the text.
Remember those who are still in Gaza.
That too, correct. Let us remember the soldiers who are still in Gaza and still fighting. We got a very tragic reminder earlier this week that it's not over. They're still in danger, and there's 3 wounded men from this recent situation in the hospital undergoing surgery. So thank you for reminding us of that step. Our topic for this year is memory. I called the course Recollection, Commemoration, and Myth Making and Tanakh Making Memory. And I chose the word making memory, very deliberately, knowing that it's a somewhat provocative word, because there are many people who would say that memory is spontaneous. You remember. What does it mean, making memory? I mean, now we use it when we say, oh, we're making memories, right? We do a nice activity so we can take pictures and then have it in our memory box. And does anybody here go back 5 years and actually develop pictures in their phone? I don't know. I'm impressed. You're a very thorough individual. I have so many pictures and I never ever look back. But the truth is that research in all kinds of fields, neurology and sociology and history and many others that I'm less, in touch with, suggests that memory is very much a constructed thing. Yes, some memories form spontaneously. Things happen and we remember them. And sometimes the remembrance kind of rises spontaneously, right? I meet a person in the street and I'm reminded of a different person I once met at the same spot, and the memory comes back and it's kind of intrusive. We're also very aware now that memories can be part of the experience of trauma, that certain memories keep intruding in ways that are not helpful to a functional life for people. And that's part of the crisis of mental health that we're dealing now in the wake of the war. But all that acknowledged and said, we humans actually have a lot to do with shaping our own memories, the way we frame them, the way we tell them, the way we share them, the way we commemorate things. We don't need to go far. We're living through a moment in history when there's what some people would like to call the war over the narrative, right? What happened? What led us to October 7th? What led us to this deal that we signed, Trump's deal, or whatever you want to call it? I don't know. Is it a good deal? Are we in a good place? Is a government a good government or a bad government? All those things are in dispute, and the way people tell the story of the past few years, the way people take what happened and turn it into memories, is, I'm not sure what word to use, determined by their positions on these questions, and also tries to determine other people's positions on these questions. So I think we live at a time when the mechanism behind making memory is actually more transparent to us than usual, because we see that this is what's happening, that people are trying to shape memory. And lest you think I'm accusing them of shaping memory, we're all doing that. Everybody's engaged in that, more consciously or less consciously, but everybody's engaged in that right now. And the question of what day, for example, are we going to commemorate on October 7th or on Simchat Torah or on Kaf Dalet Tishrei? That's a loaded question. It's going to shape the narrative of how things are remembered 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. So we are engaged in making memories. And the truth is, this was already happening during the war. Already during the war, the way people were telling the story, I mean, I know we're not really out of the war, but I think that we can say that we're in a different stage of it. So I'm talking about the previous stage, okay? Already during the intense fighting, the way people were telling the stories of what happened were wildly different. Again, I'm not trying to say what my opinion is. I'm not trying to indoctrinate or politicize our discussion here, but I mean, some people tell the story of October 7th with the word hafkara in it. How would you say it in English? Abandonment, betrayal, even. Hafkara, I think, is stronger than abandonment, because abandonment can be neglect. I think here there's an element of betrayal. But some other people tell the story of October 7th, and the main word that they use is gvura, right? Heroism. Where you put the limelight, where you put the emphasis, changes the way it's remembered. Even, not something as world-shattering as tourism, but every battle, every event within the war, the story that frames what happened in it was told differently by different people. And this is why I chose this topic for us, not in order to complicate our lives, but because I think that maybe by looking at Tanakh and seeing how the narratives, but also the characters, the protagonists within the biblical stories deal with memory, with shaping memory, with being overwhelmed by memories, with forgetting. Forgetting is the other side of memory, and it's a very important part of it. Again, going back to the research on trauma and how certain memories really need to be pushed back against. By seeing that this is a struggle or an effort or a striving, to use Amitai Tzvi's word, that we have been engaged in for thousands of years, and that Tanakh has some insights to offer us about, we can perhaps not come to terms, I'm sorry, it's not really come to terms, but approach our own struggles with the questions of memory in our life with more confidence, or with more tools, in our internal toolbox. And tools that come from Tanakh are, I feel like they're extra precious to us. So this is the motivation behind teaching this course now. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm not always so depressing. I don't always talk about the war and sad things. So please, I, just saying. And what I want to do today, in a sense, is I'm not going to start by exploring one particular story of memory making or remembrance or recollection in depth. Instead, I want to touch upon several stories a bit more gently, like less in depth, but more kind of to get a broader perspective. Because what I want to do today is show some of the ways or some of the roles memory plays in Tanakh. Mostly what I hope we can see together is that memory plays many roles in Tanakh, just like it plays in our life. Those roles are complicated. They go into our relationship with God, into our relationship with each other, into our understanding of what the covenant is. And by looking at it a little bit, just getting a little bit of a like a buffet, like a finger food of trying a little bit of this, trying a little bit of that, get a little bit of a sense of the breadth of the topic. And then we will follow up in the coming classes this semester, next semester as well, by focusing on themes or particular types and roles that memory plays. And then every lesson we will go in depth into one particular story where it happens. But I wanted to open the topic by getting a little bit of a sense of what's out there more generally. Any questions so far, just before we delve into the text? Okay, we will open the Zoom for comments and questions towards the end of the class per the administration's instructions. So we want to hear what you have to say as well. Let us delve right in. I decided that when you'll teach Tanakh, there's nowhere better to place than Parashat Shavua. Okay. So let's start with Parashat Shavua. In box 1 in the source sheet before you, I brought 2 quotes from Parashat Noach. And in both of those quotes, memory plays an important role. So let's look at it together. I'll read in the Hebrew. You have the English right before you as well. Source 1, Bereshit Chet, Pasuk Aleph. ויזכור אלוקים את נוח, ואת כל החיה, ואת כל הבהמה אשר איתו בתיבה, ויעבר אלוקים רוח על הארץ, וישוחו המים. God remembered Noah and the beast and the cattle, etc., etc., and he brought a wind to make the water subside. When you look in the concordancia, and you look for the root zachar, remember, this is the first quote that comes up. I'm not sure. I want to double check it with a better concordancia, because it seems weird for me that we can go through 7 chapters without memory intruding. So stay tuned for further developments once I find other additions. But in the concordancia, that thing I looked at before this class, this is actually the first time it appears. And it immediately triggers question for all the classic commentators. And I think we can guess what the questions are, right? First of all, what does it mean God remembered? What a weird concept. What, is God a human who forgets? What does it mean God remembers? Now, we're so used to it because we've been reading Tanakh for thousands of years that maybe it doesn't strike us as strongly, but think about reading Tanakh for the very first time. You saw that God is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. He created the world, he destroyed the world, he's in control of everything, he named everything, he made everything, and then he forgot. It just doesn't add up. So the commentators want to know, what does it mean for God to remember? Another question that rises, why does he not remember Noah's family? Noah is mentioned, the Chayot are mentioned, the Behemot are mentioned. What about his children, his wife? What about them? What, they're still somewhere absent from God's mind? Let's leave those questions open for a second because I want to show you the next place where memory appears according to the concordancia I used, and that is in the very next chapter after Noah comes out of the Teva and God makes a new covenant with him. Let's look at it in Bereshit Tet. It's a second source, still the first box. ויאמר אלוקים אל נוח ואל בניו איתו לאמור. This time the sons are included. ואני, הנני מקים את בריתי איתכם. I am establishing, I will hold this covenant with you, ואת זרעכם אחריכם, and your descendants after you, ואת כל הנפש החיה אשר איתכם בעוף ובבהמה ובכל חיית הארץ איתכם, מכל יוצאי התיבה לכל חיית הארץ. It's the first time that there's a, it's interesting, right? There's a covenant with the animals too. והקימותי את בריתי איתכם, ולא יכרת כל בשר עוד מימי המבול, ולא יהיה עוד מבול לשחט הארץ. The covenant here is that I'll never destroy the world again. ויאמר אלוקים, and he gives them a sign, זאת אות הברית, אשר אני נותן ביני וביניכם, ובין כל נפש חיה אשר איתכם לדורות עולם, I have given you a sign for this covenant, את קשתי נתתי בענן, the rainbow, והייתה לאות ברית ביני ובין הארץ. והיה בענני ענן על הארץ, when there's clouds over the earth, ונראתה הקשת בענן. Whenever there's clouds, you can see the keshet בענן. By the way, if you read the pshat, right, there's all kinds of, when I was a kid, and I heard that story through the filter of Midrash and my kindergarten teacher's imagination, like so many children, I got really scared whenever I saw a rainbow because I'm like, oh, it means God is angry and he wants to destroy us, but he says, because of that brit, I can't do it. And that was a very terrifying kind of experience for a child. I thought it was just me, but then I talked to other people and I discovered it's a pretty common experience, even with other kindergarten teachers. And when you read the pshat, that's not what it said. I'm not going to go now into the midrash and the parshaniyot. There are parshaniyot that lead in that direction, but the pshat is much more simple. The pshat says it's going to be a phenomenon that whenever there's a cloud, there's going to be a rainbow. That's just the way it is. And what God is saying is not, this is a sign I'm angry. Rather, he says, when there's clouds, and clouds, as we know, are the precursor for rain, and rain is a precursor for a mabul, there's going to be a keshet there, and then what's going to happen? And he goes in Pasuk Tetvav 15, וזכרתי את בריתי אשר ביני וביניכם, ובין כל נפש חיה בכל בשר, ולא יהיה עוד המים למבול לשחט כל בשר. You know how we use Google Calendar to set reminders? I mean, I don't know about you, I do. Some people do it in other ways. My mom has a physical calendar that she marks things in and then sometimes forgets to look at them. But I think that's also pretty normal. Some people have like little post-it notes that they put on their door. I'm not going to go into a list of everything people do to jog their memory, but it almost sounds as if that's what God is doing. He says, I'm going to make it so that whenever rain is forthcoming, there's going to be this sign, and that's going to be like a ping. Oh yeah, don't destroy the world with a bulga. Don't get confused. Don't be carried up by your emotions. It's preposterous. I hope you agree with me. It's preposterous. What do you mean God needs a reminder? God does not need a Google Calendar. But it's an odd description. It's easier in a sense to live with the Ganenet's version of events that this is God sending us a direct message that he's angry at us right now, because then it's about us, our perception. God is putting it there for our perception. The way God describes it, it's as if he is the one who needs a reminder. Let's finish reading the source. Just a minute. I'll read now in the English in 16. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on earth. That, God said to Noah, shall be the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on earth. Just to kind of highlight how disturbing the imagery of God needing reminders is, I want to compare it to a very different text, to Megillat Esther for a second, in the bottom of box 1. It's the beginning of the second chapter, after the first chapter where Vashti refuses to come and is disposed of in one way or another. אחר הדברים האלה, כשוך חמת המלך אחשוורוש, זכר את ושתי ואת כל אשר עשת ואת אשר נגזר עליה. Achashverosh wakes up, presumably, it's not just like anger that needs to abate. It's also his hangover. And he kind of remembers suddenly everything that happened. And there too, there's kind of a icky feeling of like, what, you just like disposed of your queen and you were not really fully compos mentis when that happened? Like you were too angry to fully understand what you're doing? Is that what it's implying? It's kind of like, do we want someone in a position of power who on a whim basically can make such big life-altering decisions, violent decisions, and then suddenly remember it when his anger recedes? It's a very uncomfortable image. There's also a sense of dramatic, it's a dramatic moment because you kind of implied here, without being said, is that he's unpleasantly surprised. That there's an element of surprise for him, and that the surprise is not particularly pleasant. If you think I'm just making it up, look at the next pasuk. ויאמרו נערי המלך משרתיו, יבקשו למלך נערות בתולות טובות מראה. Meaning, it's clear that his servants perceive this moment of remembrance as a problem. As the king is displeased, we need to find something quickly to placate him, to help him move forward. Because presumably when he's angry, bad things happen to the people around him. We already know that. So presumably if you're his servant, you're very invested in keeping him in a state of emotional equilibrium or being pleased at any rate. A second. Hashverosh, right, is a human flawed character, given great power and great responsibility that he doesn't carry out very well. It's kind of uncomfortable that his description here really kind of echoes the description of God in the Mabul. Also in the Mabul, God is moved by emotion. We didn't bring those sources, but it's true. God is disappointed in humanity. God is nicham, regrets creating humanity. And then after a time, after God acts on these emotions, forgive me the language, I'm just kind of drawing from the pshat, then, ויזכור אלוקים את נוח ואת כל החיה, and oh, just in case, I need reminders in case I ever want to kill you all again. How can the text in Bereshit portray God as someone who can forget and someone who needs reminders? This is a question that bothered commentators, and honestly, they give very, very different answers. And I would like to ask you for a second, we're not going to open it for a lengthy discussion, but maybe if two of you would like to share, how do you see it? I'm not asking you to say Rashi says, Rambam says, I'm asking you to tell me, how do you read it? When you read it, how does it make sense for you? When you read this text about God remembering Noah? Anyone? Yes. Just speak up.
It's more of for us, number one, and it's showing us like he does Commemoration have examples of how we should.
You're saying it's for us. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Meaning the Quran is meant for Hashem to learn. Many times he does, he's for us only, not for Hashem to learn.
You're saying that God, the Tanakh rather, speaks in terms of memory to teach us something. That we are expected to imitate God, right? We're supposed to kind of raise ourselves by trying to be worthy of the Tselem Elohim inside us, or that shapes us. And when we see that God remembers those in need, and we see that God makes himself reminders not to kind of destroy, not to punish too harshly, this is really educational, it's a pedagogical message. But this is really beautiful. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, did you raise your eye?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how to phrase it. I don't know if it hits with me as much as like a conscious memory, as like that feeling when you, and again, this is anthropomorphizing God, okay, but so is the text. Like, the feeling that like, when you wake up and you're like, oh, did that all just really happen? You know, it's like the minute, and again, if you take it into like our own current events, that feeling of like, so wait a minute, did I just, can I make sense in my brain in order to form a story or a memory of that just happened? Like, okay, the whole world was destroyed, and now I want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So like, I need a beat in order to like keep that in my conscious. It's
You
like
need to be.
I need a beat. Like
Beat.
it's almost like when you first wake up in the morning, you're like, wait, did I just dream that, or is that my life now? Or
Mhm.
you know, did I? And again, that can be for all different kinds of things. Like you know, in other words, it's not necessarily like the Google reminder as much as the brain putting that again in my conscious.
What's your name? Sorry.
You don't know me.
What?
Elaine.
Elaine.
Yeah.
So thank you, Elaine. I'll try and repeat it, and then I want to build on it a little bit more. You say that there's a certain sense, like I mean, yes, the text anthropomorphizes God, so we're gonna go with the text while acknowledging that God is not a man, doesn't have the same flaws, etc. But you're saying that in a sense, it's not about memory per se, like, oh, I remembered, or I need a reminder. It's about organizing it somehow, about choosing how we tell the story, perhaps, or something like that. And I will reopen the conversation in a minute. Like I said, right now we have to continue, but I want to build on that for a second before we proceed. When I talked about how we tell the story of the war, I mentioned that in many ways, the words we use or the shape of the narrative make a difference in the meaning of the memory. And in research, and we'll see those texts as we go deeper into the year. I'll bring some of those academic texts about memory and the kind of foundational texts that explore what memory is. But one of the distinctions that is most accepted is that memory and history are not the same. Professor Yerushalmi talked about that at length, that history is facts. It's like things happen, you know, and the historian tries as much as possible. And I know there's all kinds of historians, but at the heart of the historian's profession is the quest to try and understand what really happened and in what order and in what way and at what time and how things affected each other. Memory is a form of identity making. It's the kind of how we take what happened and incorporate it into who we are right now. And that's never factual. It's all about meaning. And you're saying that what you need when you create meaning out of the chaos of events and experiences is an organizing principle. And in a sense, what perhaps the parable of God remembering teaches us here is, if we take your idea from before about imitating God or learning from God, I would say two things about it. One is that God, the moment of remembrance, it's not a moment of, oh yeah, I forgot about them. Oh yeah, I better take care of that ark. It's still stuck in the water. It's not that. It's God says, right now, the organizing principle that I want to focus on is not people are doomed for destruction, people are evil, I regret the word I want to focus on, the story I want to focus on is salvation. is here are the worthy people who are going to start a new world. So the kind of all of the genome of everybody is on that little ark. And I'm going to enable them to restart humanity, to restart animal life, to restart the world, really, as an inhabited, other than by fish, place. And that kind of interpretation that says that when God remembers, what it really means is that God chooses to focus, in a sense, to kind of highlight a certain aspect. That I think is the most common, not in these terms, but that's, I think, what animates a lot of the commentary on this text, but also on God remembering the people in Egypt, right? Or, forgive me, God remembering his promises to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's about, sorry. It's about God remembering, it's about God focusing on a certain idea, on a certain element as what is going to be the organizing principle of the story right now. We will see that many times this year in many of the texts we're going to read. I want to show you one example of it that's in the last box. If you don't mind, flipping to page 3, box 4 for a second. In the second source from Yirmiyahu 31, Yirmiyahu Lamed Aleph, I'll read, I'm not going to read from the beginning. I'll read from verse 18 and I'll read in the English. I can hear Ephraim lamenting. You have chastised me, and I am chastised like a calf that has not been broken. Receive me back, let me return, for you, O Eternal One, are my God. Now that I have turned back, it's still Ephraim speaking, I am filled with remorse. Now that I am made aware, I strike my thigh, I am ashamed and humiliated, for I hear the disgrace of my youth. And now in Hebrew, Pasuk Kaf, Haben yakir li Ephraim, im yeled shashuim, ki midei dabri bo, zachor ezkerenu od. Truly Ephraim is as dear to me, a child that is dandled. Whenever I have turned against him, and I'll explain why it's translated like that, my thoughts would dwell on him still. Rashi, in his interpretation here, points out that dabri bo, and it's based in the Midrash, dabri bo, it's not the same as dabri alav. When the word dabri is followed by be, bo, ba, bahem, it's almost always negative. It's like it's kind of laying out the rebuke, laying out what somebody did wrong. So when God says midei dabri bo, what God is saying is not, oh, whenever I, like, when I read it, before I read Rashi, I assumed what it meant was it like, how it is. I have a Danny who's 9 years old, you know him, and he's very interesting and wild child. And whenever I talk about him, you see I'm smiling. It's like, it's just automatic. You talk about your little kid and you smile. But that's not what God is saying. What God is saying, whenever I speak against him, Zachor ezkerenu od. And the interpretation here that most interpreters offer is something along the lines of, even as I am laying out all his wrong, even as I'm explaining, kind of standing in judgment, really that's what it means. I'm standing in judgment over him. I can't help but remember the good parts. I can't remember but how much I love him like a child who you are likely to forgive, right? Even if they turn off all the electricity in the house, for example, not that that happens. And kind of fix it. So this is the same idea that reality is complex. People are complex. They have many aspects for them. Like Elaine described, we now live through a moment of a whirlwind of like, what is going on? There's all these things, all these feelings, like you implied at any rate, right? And it's like the choice what to focus on changes the meaning and the shape that all this mess takes in our minds. So when God remembers us, when he remembers Noah, when he remembers us in Egypt, when he remembers the promises to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, when he remembers that Ephraim is Yeled Shashuim, Yakirli, Ben Yakirli, he's choosing not to focus on those aspects where we did wrong, where we deserve what's coming to us, where we earned our bad experiences, but rather to focus on something else. To give that kind of the place, not just at center stage, but as the organizing principle, the rest of the story is shaped around. And as was said before, we're supposed to learn from God. So I think that's a helpful way to think of limud lekav zchut, right? We have this idea that we're supposed to judge people favorably. It does not mean we need to ignore their flaws or what we disagree or disapprove of in their positions and their behavior. What it means is trying to remember that there's other parts and focusing on them. I want to open for questions, comments. Yeah.
Rainbow is a beautiful thing. And you said it precedes rain, which is forward, but rain is just a bracha. And if it was to be, if it was like a wake up call, I've got to stop myself from destroying the world, wouldn't you maybe show some fun and lightning? But the rainbow is something very positive and shows that.
You're saying you're asking, do you understand correctly that you're saying why is the rainbow, which is a beautiful thing, a reminder of maybe I would have wanted to destroy the world, but I won't. Like why is this?
On potential.
The focus on potential, right? Maybe. I think there's also another aspect of it, which is rainbow. When do we have rainbow? When there's sun and rain, right? It's like that it's a sign of mixture. Maybe that's an acceptance that we are mixed bag also, and a choice to focus on the good. And maybe it's also a statement of like, when there's still rain and sun, that's when God says, I'm not going to go all the way to just rain. I'm not going to go to that extreme. I'm going to let the world exist in that. Sometimes I treat you harshly because you deserve it. Sometimes I have mercy on you. I'm not going to let me datadin. I'm not going to let one aspect overall. Oh, yes.
To me, mentioned that it's remembrance is attached to meaning. And there's a conscious decision on what meaning you're gonna put on it. And to me, I don't know if there's sources where the whole connected to Hashem is negative, because even with the rainbow, it's a focus on the positive of midat rachamim and the first remembering, yes, the evil of the hardship in Mitzrayim, but doing the good.
Yes.
So to me, it's very connected because things happen, as you said. But the interpretation that you want to put and the memory you create is a conscious effort.
Correct. And it's, I'll just repeat so we're all on the same page. You're saying that recollection is tied to meaning. And when God remembers, overall, it's attached to rachamim. And it's true. I mean, in Tfilat Rosh Hashanah, right? We have this whole section of Zichronot. This whole section is about that. It's about God choosing to treat us with rachamim. We don't particularly want to invoke midat hadin on Rosh Hashanah. That is not our purpose. Let's put it this way. So Zikaron, when it comes to God, almost always, and we'll see some more complicated. I mean, so God says he'll remember what Amalek did. He tells us to remember, but he also says that he will remember. So there are examples that are different, but almost always it's a memory that's attached to rachamim. Yes, over there.
And back to the original,
Yeah.
No, I find it a little bit disturbing because God is the one who put him in the ark. God remembered him originally to save him and put him in the ark. So it's almost like saying, well, maybe I forgot him, and then all of a sudden I remembered him. So it's like, well, why is this even necessary? Put him there to save him.
I'm not sure what you mean. I mean,
He chose Noah as the animals to
mhm.
save them to continue humanity. So of course God remembered him because he put him in the ark.
Yes.
So it seems almost superfluous to say God remembered him because
You're saying, I think I understand. Let's see if I understand. I think you're asking or you're saying that it's a little disturbing to think of God remembering Noah when he's in the ark hanging between life and death, because he's the one who put him there, like, and he put him there because he favored him. So what, he withdrew his favor or not? So you're pushing us in the it's a good question, and I think you're pushing us in the direction of making a very important distinction that is very important, and I'm worried about having gone too much in the other direction, so I'm gonna make the distinction now. God is not a man. When we talk about God remembering, we can't assume that it means what it means for us. And it's what I brought today is just one example, but we will see it often this year when we look at stories of God remembering, that it's almost a way for us to relate to the fact, I mean, God knows everything all at once, all the time. But the way God manages the world is the focus shifts, like that God sometimes does one thing, then does another thing. And we don't have a way to understand why or to describe the fact that God sometimes does this, sometimes does that, because God is eternal. And it just, there's that gap between, I mean, Maimonides writes about it at length, right? It's like, we can't really speak about God. So we do our best not to describe God, but to describe how God manages the world using metaphors, using words that can explain something to us that come from our world of experience. And the word memory is used as a metaphor for God now choosing to focus on something. So it's like God chose Noah, put him in the ark, but then God focused on the work of destruction. That was God's work. Noah was taking care of the animals in the ark. Great, he's safe. That's his job now. God is focused on destruction. But then the story needs to go back to Rachamim, because the world can't exist when all God does is destroy and judge. So it's like the word zikaron here, recollect, right, shifts us to a different aspect of God or to a different focal point of God. Going back though, when we look at parables or allusions or metaphors, sometimes they teach us less about what we're trying to describe and more about ourselves, right? About how we understand memory. So when I see the word memory here, it doesn't give me such a good understanding of what God is, because I don't have the tools to understand God. But it does give me an understanding of how Tanakh views memory. And that memory for Tanakh is the choice to focus on something, like the choice to shift focus, mindfulness almost. Yes, it's less about spontaneous, it is millennial. But it's true, I think, in the sense that it's God now is focused. And we will talk about the stories. We will have a class dedicated to it. So I don't want to go into it too much now, but we'll talk about the stories of the Akarot, of the barren women in Tanakh whom God remembers, right? And it's clear there that the remembrance is not that he was not aware of their existence. It's a choice to engage with them in a certain way. It's a choice to focus on this aspect and change it in their lives. So we'll talk more about that later. Last comment or question before we, yeah.
Just all the time as you're talking, I'm thinking of the words memory have for us significance of words like Yisor, Yom HaZikaron, Askara, and the weight that it has for us, the significance when you get to the essence of something and what it does to each one of us when we hear that word, Yisor. Everybody here knows what it does to them, and that's what it's doing to us. It's remembering the essence of it, a person, an event, promise, whatever it is.
You're talking about Iskor, Askara, Yom HaZikaron, and how we try to remember the essence. And this is what Zikaron is. It's focusing on the essence. I agree. I think that there's another element which is worth developing. And again, we're just going to touch upon it today. We're going to have everything we do today is really just touching upon these themes, and we're going to then slowly unpack them more with careful readings of particular stories. But there's an element of empathy and rachamim. And I think that there's a lot of, you hear that a lot. People after loss say, I don't want you to remember how my son died. I want you to remember how he lived. Like, I want you to remember him with love, right? It's not enough. We don't just want people to remember our loved ones. Oh, this person existed and died in battle. We want them to remember like the essence of the person. We want them to remember something good about him. Another element of sympathy or chesed and rachamim in memory. And this has less to do with God and more to do with ourselves, really. I'm sure you had that experience of someone you haven't talked to in a while suddenly calling you or messaging you like, I just thought about you and I want to see how you're doing. Or how are you? Or just like pinging you in some social media or any sense of like being reached out to. It's a good feeling, right? It means that someone out there who's busy with their own concerns and their own life suddenly you matter to them enough to be on their mind. One of the soldiers we lost in this war, Neville Fisher, is a nephew of someone I know. He made a point of calling his grandparents every Friday, and he had like a reminder, like Otobrit, right? He had a reminder on his phone. So it's not that he spontaneously thought about it, but his grandparents felt very cared for because every Friday he would reach out to them, even if he's in, unless he's like non-communicado in the army, but like even if he's busy, even if he has friends he wants to see, even if he made time for them. I think when we talk about God remembering humanity, there's an element of that. There's an element of feeling cared for. Like you might think that the story of the Mabul is a story of God washing his hands of us. But no, he still cares. He still thinks about Noah in that ark and cares about it, and it's important to him. That's like the chesed. That's the chesed. But I want to shift gears for a second. We talked a lot about God remembering and what does it mean that God remembers and what does that tell us about memory and the issue of chesed and the issue of organizing principle of the narrative. I want to stay with the organizing principle, but shift from God's remembrances and our national remembrances. So please go to box number 3. And I brought only 2 examples out of a saga that will occupy a lot of our attention more towards the second semester. The saga of the memory of the Exodus. The memory of the Exodus, remembering the Exodus, thinking about the Exodus, and remembering also in the sense of committing acts that bring the memory to life, right? Memory is not just here. Memory is, like you mentioned, azkara, izkor yom hazikaron. All of these are things that have ritual to them and words that we say. So the memory of Pesach, right? In Leila Seder, in the davening, in Kiddush, in so many ways, it's ingrained in the way we act and live, is a huge foundational concept in Judaism. It's going to take us some time to unpack it from many different directions, and I bechavna want to do it in the second semester, like towards Pesach, so it'll be our Pesach prep as well. But I want to touch upon it from 2 angles today, just to sense it, just to see what it looks like. One way is in Dvarim Hey Pasuk Tetvav, and in many other places, but I just had to choose one example. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew. You have the English before you. V'zacharta ki eved ha'ita be'eretz Mitzrayim. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. ויוציאך השם אלוקיך משם, ביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה. על כן ציווך השם אלוקיך לעשות את יום השבת. That is why Hashem ordered you to make the Shabbat. And now I want to point out that there's a duality in the al-ken. The al-ken, and therefore, right? Shabbat is meant to remind us of the fact we are free. We are not slaves whose masters can tell them you must work all the time. We are free. We can take that day of shvita, unless we're dealing with pikuach nefesh like nurses, I know. But we can take this day because we are free. We are not slaves. So the Shabbat is, in its essence, a reminder. It's something that brings the story of the Exodus to mind. But there's another way that you can interpret the relation, the causal relation between God giving us Shabbat and the order to remember that we are used to be slaves, and due to God's Yad Chazakah Zwanat, we're no longer slaves. It's not just that Shabbat reminds us of that or helps us. I'll put it differently. It's not just that Shabbat helps us uphold the tzivui to remember. It's also that the tzivui to remember explains the Shabbat. This is part and parcel of a whole set of mitzvot that God ties to us being slaves in Egypt. He reminds us that we were slaves in Egypt when he tells us not to mistreat the Hebrew slave. God reminds us that we're slaves in Egypt when he tells us to share our hard-won earnings, right? Our food that we grew with those less fortunate than ourselves. In many ways, Rabbi Sachs, I didn't bring the quote, but Rabbi Sachs has a beautiful interpretation of it in his book about, I forgot, ceremonies, about the Chagim. I forgot the name of the book, sorry. Say it again.
Ceremony and celebration.
Yes, thank you for ceremonies and celebrations. Where he points out that coming out of Egypt is meant, like, you could have had Judaism without Egypt. Why did we need to go through it? And we needed to go through it. Avraham already knew that we're going to go through it from Brit Ben Abtalim. So Rabbi Sachs says we needed to see what the civilization of the era was built on, what were its foundation, how it ran itself, how the level of exploitation and cruelty and power abuse that made that civilization tick, and not just that civilization, Nineveh, Ashur, Bavel, like all those big empires. The way they worked was by their kings cruelly, ruthlessly exploiting the little people. And God wanted us to experience what it's like for ourselves so that we would know on a visceral level that we're supposed to create something different. That our purpose in the world is to create the anti-Egypt, the mirror image of that, to create a society built on sharing, on giving, on kindness, on justice, not just lovey-dovey, justice, tzedek, tzedek, tirdov, and on acknowledging, most importantly, that every person is created b'tselem, and that demands something from us. That means that we can't just treat them as a means to our ends. And when God says, "V'zacharta ki eved hayita be'eretz Mitzrayim," right? He's telling us to remember, he's ordering us to remember, but he's also explaining to us what the Shabbat is meant to create in the world. Because in Shabbat, everybody in your household is supposed to lishbot. It's not just you, the master, right? We say in the Kiddush, how do we say in the Kiddush? Mincha, Utcha, right? Everybody. Exactly, everybody. Mamash, everybody is supposed to lishbot. Shabbat is not just for you to enjoy yourself. Shabbat is for you to acknowledge that even if you're the master and someone is serving you, or they're your children and they're dependent on you, or etc., they are as created in God's image as you. They are as worthy of the dignity of this shvitat malacha as you. This is what it is that you're creating.
This sort of implies that there wasn't Shabbat until they got to the Torah. I mean, in Bereshit, you were told to rest on the seventh day. That's before we got to the Torah. It's
Where are we told that in Bereshit?
But it's
We're told that Hashem rested on the seventh day. We're not told that humanity is expected to rest on the seventh day.
an implication, maybe. But
You know, there's a lot of midrashim that talk about that.
that's all changed. There wasn't before that Shabbat.
Shabbat, as God's Shabbat existed. Shabbat is an obligation that we have to keep. It does not exist until God gives us the Torah. There are midrashim that the Avot kept it anyway, but not because they were obligated. And it was not a national thing. It was like their choice to follow God. That's the difference, right, between the Avot and we are born as a covenanted nation, not even in Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're born in Mount Sinai. You know, we're born through the God making a brit with us, which is very different from the brit he made with Noah, but we're not going to go into that now because it demands a lot more. It's like our status in the brit is much more active and involved. And we need reminders, not just him. And there's a lot of reminders, like tzitzit, like all kinds of things that are reminders for us of the brit. But the Shabbat as an institution that we have to follow happens after the Exodus. It's not it's very much on it. Now, in the Kiddush, right, we have two there's two strands that we highlight. There's the strand of Briat Haolam, Vayachulu Hashamayim Va'aretz. But there's also the Egypt strand. And the difference is that the Shabbat is created in the world. It's part of the way God wants the world to be in Bereshit. But it becomes an obligation that's tied to the kind of world we want to create as humans, or we have to create as humans, in after Yetziat Mitzrayim and in gratitude for it. I'm sorry, just before I don't want to develop it further now in discussion, because I do want to bring the next example of how memory and identity come together, still in box 3. And this has to do with forgetting, with the opposite of remembrance. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of God, died at the age of 110 years and was buried on his own property at Timnach Cheres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Now, we know that times when leadership changes, definitely in Tanakh and ancient times, are times of potential chaos, right? You look in the history of England, every time a king or queen dies in like the Middle Ages onwards, is a time when contenders to the throne step up, or when a weak heir gets, it's just like times when there's a lot of tension and a lot of shifting of alliances. So, you know, we read it, oh, it said Yoshua died. No, it's not just Yoshua died. It's like, what's going to happen next? Will there be a successful transfer of leadership? Will there be a successful transfer of the covenant? The answer, sadly, is no. And all that generation were likewise gathered to their ancestors. Another generation arose after them, which had not experienced. And it's interesting that it says experience. In Hebrew, it says asher lo yad'u, who didn't know. I'll read it in Hebrew so it's clear. Asher lo yad'u et Hashem. They didn't know God. V'gam et ha'ma'aseh asher asa leYisrael. Nor did they know everything that God wrought for us. Now, if you read it beretzef, if you read the Tanakh beretzef, this is 2 books after Dvarim. Dvarim, throughout Sefer Dvarim, and we'll talk about Sefer Dvarim in this course as well, Moshe keeps harping on the issue of memory. He keeps telling them, you must tell your children about Yetziat Mitzrayim. You must tell your children about how God delivered us from travel in the desert. You must tell your children. Why? Because if you don't tell your children, they're going to forget God. They're going to forget that they are beholden to God. They're going to Ishman Yeshurun Vaivat, grow fat and kick off the covenant, and that will lead to disastrous results. This is practically a prescribed consequence. Like, we know what this forgetfulness is going to lead to, and we see it right away. Pasuk Yud Aleph 11. And the Israelites did what was offensive to God. They worshipped Baalim and forsook the Eternal, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from among the gods of the people around them and bowed down to them. They provoked God. They forsook God and worshipped Baal and Ashtaroth. Having become incensed Israel, God then handed them over to the foes who plundered them, surrendering them to their enemies on all sides. They could no longer hold their own against their enemies. All the things Moshe warned them against are coming to pass. These 2 quotes in box 3, the instruction to remember Egypt and to let our experience of freedom from Egypt inform our social norms, and the social norms to then reiterate and bolster the memory. It's kind of a closed circuit like that, or mutual influence at any rate. And what happens when we forget and then stop practicing the kind of religion, the kind of covenantal instructions we're supposed to practice, are only 2 examples out of what is in many ways the central preoccupation with memory throughout Tanakh. And that is with memory as a safeguard of identity. And that's going to be another theme that we're going to explore at length this year. I'm just putting it out there. But I don't want to end on this heavy note. So let's go to box 4. And I will open to comments and questions in a minute. I also want to hear from the people on the Zoom. And I want to talk about another aspect of memory. I mean, I'm not sure it's actually a positive note on second thought. It has to do with the end of days, so that's nice, but I don't know. Maybe yeah. Not just about how God wants us to remember things, not just about how God remembers things, not just about the memory of the Exodus is a crucial part of our identity. I want to talk about how the way we remember things is political, meaning it's tied to our understanding of how things should be in our society and shapes how we will behave into the future. And I would say more than that, it's partisan. And I think the best example I can bring of it is the last source here at the bottom of box 4. It's only one example out of many that comes in Chumash Bamidbar of how the people, or in Shmot as well, how the people, not Moshe, not God, remember the Exodus. And we discover in various places that at least for some of the people who experience the Exodus themselves, the way, the organizing principle of their memories is not we were slaves in Egypt and God took us out with Yad Chazaka V'Zchor, but rather something else. And the context here is the conflict with Korach and Atato, Korach and all the different people who flock to him, who, by the way, are a hodgepodge of different interests. There's Korach who wants to be more important. There's Bnei Reuven who are upset that their Bechorah is taken from them. There's Datan and Aviram who rabble rousers who, whenever Moshe, like, they just seem to always be there to kind of poke at Moshe. And Moshe is trying to de-escalate. Moshe is trying, he tells them all, oh, come tomorrow, bring your machtot, bring a ktoret to God, and God will choose who is his and burn the others. But then he tries and kind of goes and does negotiation behind the scene, and he tries to talk everybody out of it. And he tries with Datan and Aviram. He sends for them and asks them to come and talk to him. And they respond very strongly and negatively. Moshe sent for Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliav, but they said, we will not come. Lo na'aleh. Now, I want to just pause for a second and say that the words lo na'aleh echo very strongly when you read Chumash Bamidbar Beretzef, because the story before that is a story of the Meraglim and the Ma'apilim. Meaning right before the Korach story, the people, I mean, in the order as it's written, there's some arguments in Chazal whether maybe the order is not quite right. Forget it for a second. Let's just say we read it in the Pshat. The people chose lo la'alot, not to go, and were taken, the possibility of going to Israel was taken from them. And then, in a moment of regret, some of them said, no, alon na'aleh, we will go, we will go, we will go. And they go against Moshe and God's instructions, that's the Mapilim, and they all die. So this is the trauma and the knowledge that hangs in the air. All these people just found out that they're not going to make it to Israel. The story that they thought they're about to live, the story of we were slaves in Egypt, and now we're going, and we're going to have our own country, and we're going to have our own land under the vineyard and the fig tree, etc., etc. That story is not happening. They're going to end their days in the desert. Their children will make it, but they're not going. So I think a lot of the machloket needs to be understood against that backdrop of discontent and disappointment and having to kind of live with the story you thought is your story breaking apart around you, not something we have any personal experience with, of course. So they say lo na'aleh, these kind of words that echo, and then they say this: is it not enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us? Even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey and given us possession of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out the eyes of those involved? We will not come. It's the translation here is weird. It's like he says, whatever, let's just leave it at that. Moshe was much aggrieved, and he said to Hashem, pay no regard to their oblation. I have not taken the ass of any one of them, nor have I wronged any one of them. Moshe correctly understands that they blame him of taking advantage of his position. But the accusation that they make is fascinating because they're totally reframing the story of the Exodus. Their story of the Exodus isn't we were slaves, we had such a hard time, and then Moshe, as an emissary of God, came and saved us. Their story is, we were in Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. It goes along very nicely with all those other complaints where the people say things like, oh, remember the fish and the meat and the cucumbers and the onions and the this and the that. All these memories that you're like looking at that and you're looking at the reality described in the first prakim of Shmot and you say, what are they talking about? But it brings home to us that in any moment in history, there are a lot of things going on. Like you said, like Elaine said before, there's a lot of things going on. Presumably, yes, some of them had it better than others. Rashi explains about the fish when they talk about the fish. That, yeah, they were like little fish swimming in the canals of Egypt, that they were accessible to them. But at the same time, their sons were taken for them and thrown into the Nile. And it's like, the question is, what do you choose to focus on? When you tell the story, what are the things that you hold on to? And they say, they're not even talking about the fish or anything. They're just saying, you took us in order to lehamitenu b'midbar, meaning they're totally reframing also what happened with the Meraglim. They're not saying you took us and in the end you weren't able to bring us to, which would be more fair, even if the fault is the people's. What they're saying is you took us in order to kill us. It's a conspiracy theory. They're saying you knew all along that this is where we're going to end, and you took us from a good place to put us in a bad place so you can lord over us, so you can take advantage of us. How dare you? And I think this is a very strong example of the fact that the way we tell stories, the way we use things that sometimes are even factually true, like it is true, they're all going to die in the desert. That's true. And it is also true that for some people, Egypt was a land flowing with milk and honey. The problem is that those people were like a very small caste at the top and not the Israelites, that's for sure. And they're taking those things and they're omitting others to shape a story that caters to their grievances. And that is something that humans always do. And Tanakh invites us to consider it, invites us to look at it. And we're going to see some of that in our classes. I have one last point I want to make, but we don't have much time. Are there like maybe 2 questions? I can take 2 questions. I want to see if somebody in the Zoom wants to ask first.
I actually have a question.
I can't hear you. Sorry, speak up.
I have a question. I'm wondering, what translation do you use?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'll be very honest with you. I use whatever is automatic on my Safari. So I do sometimes I play around with it because I think it's a JPS and I'm not that enamored of it, but I figured in the end that if I feel like the translation is not accurate, I'll just say what I think is the problem. So I'm not so careful with it. So sorry, I don't have a more wise answer. Yes, here.
We're asking that we're in concordance plays part of the stand first, and indeed I'm sure that's right response, but I'm wondering about the connection between the word Zachar meaning male.
So the word male appears from Perek Aleph already.
Right, but is there a connection in meaning of Zikaron and Zachar? Why is that word used to?
It's a really interesting question. I'll try and find an answer. I don't know. I just never even asked myself that. So that's an excellent question. If she's asking, the word zikaron, the shorash is the same as male, zachar. Why? Is it that males remember? I don't know. I'll look. Let's leave the gender jokes aside for a second. I'll look into it for you. I want to make one last point and then I have to run to my upstairs class. So one last point, and yes, that is an optimistic note. The first source in box 4, okay? Just like we sometimes choose to focus on certain things and the way we remember things that may not be the most accurate reading of events, but serve our purposes, God does the same thing. And a lot of times it's to our benefit. And I think one of the most beautiful examples in Yirmiyahu Bet, Pasuk Bet, Haloch vekarata be'oznei Yerushalayim. He sends Yirmiyahu to offer comfort to Jerusalem before the destruction, for after the destruction. What does he say? Le'emor, Ko amar Hashem, Zacharti lach chesed ne'oraich, ahavat kelulotayich, לכתך אחריי במדבר בארץ לא זרוע. I remember your chesed of your youth when we were first engaged and you followed me through the desert in an unsown land. And anyone who read Sefer Bamidbar is like, this is not what happened. We complained and we rebelled and we complained again and again and again and again and God punished us. And we had a very tumultuous relationship at that stage in our life. But God chooses to focus on something that is also good, the fact that we still went. And he says, this is what I choose to focus on. And this is a story that I'm going to base your Geulah on, the story that looks to the best in you, looks to the best in our relationship and builds on that. So may we learn from God in that regard. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, where we're going to start focusing on particular stories and unpacking particular meanings of memory. Shavua tov and besorot tovot, everybody. Chodesh tov.